So when you started your first business, you're young, you're married, you have one child. Um, you think about like what was that like? What was your work ethic? And when you compare that to maybe the conversation we've just been done having about the drive and work ethic of some people in society today, what sort of mental state does that create in you?
It's interesting. I think as an employee, I was probably okay. As a business owner, I was on fire. I mean, when I got the first check that had my name on it, it was like, okay, now I'm motivated. So every extra hour meant some incremental, I mean, once you were past break even, which took a while, but the idea that there was no sort of buffer between effort and result that's exactly what I needed. And I worked 7 days a week for I don't know how many years, but it didn't seem like work to me because I wasn't in there all day, but I would be, I knew, I just stayed ahead of everything. And it was, my office was 5 minutes from my house and I could, sneak over there and spend a few hours. And that seemed like the most natural thing in the world. And I was very motivated to do that. So I don't know if that, but I grew up with my dad was a lawyer and a judge, and so he worked like that. And my brother was a partner at a law firm, so he worked like that. So I was just used to, if you want to get ahead, you have hard work, and being personally responsible was how you did it. You didn't wait for somebody else to hopefully, shower you with something that may or may not be appropriate. I think one of the things that I'll never forget as long as I live is we had a billable hour goal at the firm I worked for, and everybody watched it pretty scrupulously, and it was a high number, so you could barely reach it. And I think it was 1,900 hours, and so I went into my review, and the partner said, "Well, you didn't make your chargeability goal," and he went on to the next thing. I said, "Time out. I mean, how many hours did I have?" And he said, "Well, you had 1,899.5." So I somehow hit, and I thought, I know you talk about quitting and staying. That was at that moment I knew I was leaving. I thought, that's crazy. So yeah, I wasn't going to be. That was an artificial standard, clearly.
Yeah. Your son works in the CPA business with you now, and what is it like working with your son?
It's extremely rewarding, but can be extremely challenging. I think we've reached a détente here. It was a little harder. He's been working. What did we decide today? I think 8 years since he graduated from law school. So full time for 8 years. I think the critical thing is hold him to the highest possible standard, but not an impossible standard. And I think originally I was holding him to an impossible standard. And another thing that I think is critical is that understand that the relationship I have with him is viewed throughout the firm as that's the standard for the firm. So if we treat each other with respect and hold each other to a high standard, that's how the firm will respond. And I also, I think, as I've told him a number of times, for you to be not viewed as the boss's son, you have to be the hardest working person here, or you won't, and you'll get no respect. And he is by far the hardest working person. So yeah. He's met that standard. It's funny. My older brother, who was super good student, he was editor of the Law Review, and he worked for my dad, who had a small law practice in Newport, Kentucky. In the summer between his second and third year, Mike worked there for him. And at the end of the summer, Mike was going back to school, and my dad said, "Well, would you like to work here?" And Mike said, "Well, Dad, everything I wrote all summer, every letter, every memo, said you carved it up. It was like it wasn't any good." He goes, "Well, it wasn't any good, but I see that there's some potential there." So here's my brother who's getting offers from Wall Street firms, but my dad only saw potential, not greatness. So I think he was just trying to. But that's what you do. I think you hold your own to the highest standards. Maybe, as I said, maybe too high.
If a friend came to you and said, "Hey, I'm trying to make a decision about inviting a child into a family business or not," what counsel would you give that person?
Well, I mean, it's just the other day somebody said, "Hey, I look at you and Jake and I think that's the American dream." And I thought, well, that's kind of what it looks like from the outside, but sometimes it's the American nightmare. So don't kid yourself. So I think people have to understand that, whatever your disagreements are or your different perspectives about things are, they're going to be amplified tremendously in a business environment. So you're not going to cure anybody by bringing them into your business. It's going to heighten any of the differences in your personality. Having said that, I mean, one of the things that I tell people about bringing somebody into the business is sometimes it's um, they've heard so much about the business around the dinner table and other discussions, and they've just sort of got a feel for it. So it'd be a shame to let them go someplace else and take all that talent somewhere else. Um, I'm going through this with many of my clients, and I think they've been very thoughtful about it, about the responsibility they give them, and where they want them to take the company, and staying involved. I would say mostly like a board member. The old story, nose in but fingers out, the NIFO rule. So I think that's kind of where it needs to go to eventually. And I do think that, particularly like in my business, having Jake there, I mean, he's so far ahead of where I was at his age because I've involved him in things. The practice has become far more complex, and he's been doing this for so long that he's. I'd love to have had him work someplace else for 5 years, but it would have been he'd be behind 5 years then. So,
Yeah.
but those first five were probably the most challenging. So, we both would. Never came to blows, but we had a couple of days where we didn't talk to each other, but that's okay.
When clients bring children into a family business and it doesn't work, why does it usually not work?
So there's a saying in family businesses, they call it PIE, PIE. The first generation is passionate, the second generation is interested, and the third generation is entitled. And I think it's that the difference between, particularly if a child falls into the entitled bracket with it, and the parent still in the passionate bracket, then it's the ability to see eye to eye. It'll just never happen. I'm trying to think of an instance where, I mean, I've seen it, but it usually corrects itself by the child not wanting to live up to the standard and just deciding to leave the business. So I've never had a situation where a parent had to fire a child. I'm sure I'll see it sometime before my career is over, though. Lots of separations.